Hi everyone, this is your favorite friend Jay or Jaylan Salah as you formerly know her, film critic at Geek Vibes Nation, In Session Film, and Keith Loves Movies. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Chelli Look, owner of THC Bags, the subject of Dawn Dusk.
Okay,
A
so
new
Dawn
Dawn
Dusk,
Dusk is a documentary directed by Jason and Blue Gerber, touches on themes of domestic violence, finding hope in intense grief, but also on the artistic process itself and how we heal and find ourselves through art. So Chelli, very happy to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I want to ask you about creation itself, about art, about finding yourself through art. And
Mm.
as someone who writes poetry, I think I express myself through poetry more than I can express myself through regular words or just being even with people. So I want to know, as a designer, a leatherback designer, or a designer in general, how do you express Shelley through your work?
What a phenomenal question. And I wish there was I wish there was some type of linear answer, but I think for each artist, each person, each creator, if you will, it's going to be a varied answer. For me, so the leather handbags I've not done for I closed that business in 2019, so I've not actually designed a leather good in a few years, which I'm not away from it. It will be happening again soon. It's just a transition of season and time. Specific to leather bags though, it for me, like I think any artist would say emotion can fuel design. Maybe you could say that as a poet. Emotion fuels, there's new words that arise in you when you're feeling new feelings or feeling something that you don't feel all the time, that it can really be a breeding ground for innovation. It can be a breeding ground for new ideas. And so, obviously, specific to Dawn Dusk, there was an emotional roller coaster that I was experiencing that at one point in the journey, it was almost an overload of emotion where I actually had to go into a space as an artist where I had to sit and receive and process. I didn't have a place to have an output yet. I had all of this emotion within me that I was learning to put language to and trying to navigate. And it wasn't until I sort of came over a hump of that specific wave of emotion that I was now like, I have something to say, if you will. I have something to express. I have a need to do so. And I think for any human being, like creating is at our core. And the way that we express that is going to be in different methods and mediums and even different ways throughout different seasons of our lives. Like the way that I create right now is not the way that I created 5 years ago or even 6 months ago. And so specific to Dawn Dusk, there was just this particular moment in time that the processing that I was doing of what was going on in my life met the work that I was also doing. And that doesn't always happen for artists. Sometimes what you're inspired by is something totally different than maybe the biggest thing happening in your life at that moment. I think it just varies internally. So I don't think I remember your question, but
You said
by
it
way of
perfectly.
process of creation, I think for me it can be from processing emotion. Sometimes even for me it is honestly I get a burning desire because I see something in my head or I see something in a dream and it's like, okay, I have to figure out. I see that I mentioned this in the film too. There's just moments with the bag design where the driving along the highway, I would notice the way a bridge intersected with a merge lane, and it just made me it flashed something in my mind that made me think of the way that straps go, and so I was just like trying to process how that could look in my mind, and then it was like, well, now I actually need to play this out and see if I can make it work that way. And so I think depending on the season that you're in, depending on what it is, creation itself is just the ability to put forth what's going on inside of us. And so for me, it can be, yeah, it can be processing emotion, or it can be a matter of like, there's a thing in my head and it has to find a way out.
Exactly. Wow. Perfectly said. Perfectly said. So, how did Jason and Blue approach you to make this documentary?
So they had actually come to, when I was premiering the collection, I did like an open studio event and I invited anybody and everybody that I could to come and see what I had created, see what I had done, because at the time I was redoing the website. I was going from doing wholesale and direct to consumer to just direct to consumer. So there were all of these pivot points of my business, and I just wanted to get everyone I could in the same room to create momentum and to push the message forward. It was a bit of a marketing thing. It was also I needed the encouragement. I had worked so hard on this one thing, and I wanted to share it with friends and family. I wanted to share it with new faces. And I believe that was their first time ever at the studio. And so they checked it out. And then it wasn't until a few days, maybe a couple weeks after that, that they reached out to me and said, "Hey, love what you're doing. We think we could provide a promotional video for you. What do you think? It will help what we're working on. Maybe it could help push your message." And so we met about it and discussed it. And we were like, yeah, I was all for it. Especially as a small business owner, you'll take any bit of support and promotion you
Sure,
can.
sure.
And it's also important to me to make sure that I align with the people that I collaborate with, and I saw their work and I had a lot of admiration for what they were doing and how they viewed the world, that I felt comfortable trusting them with coming into my creative world.
So you honored your sister through your brand, through your art, but also
Mm,
this film, I feel, is a love letter. So how do you think sometimes intense, I'm not going to say negative, but very overwhelming emotions like grief direct us to
mm,
probably just rediscover parts of ourselves, not just as artists, but as human beings? And I could see that through your art, but also through the documentary in specific,
mm,
because it could have started as your work, your artistry, but then it transitioned into what made Chelli, what made you
mm.
the woman and the artist you are. So how did you feel like you honored her through the documentary?
I mean, honestly, I would have to give credit to Jason and Blue with how they honored her. Um, as directors, it's their place to really see a vision and know how to put a story together. And I wish I could take credit for what they were able to capture and then tell, but being able to see the documentary was just as much a surprise to me of what story was going to be told as it is to the audience, because they followed me for so many years that I feel like there were probably several different stories that they could have captured and told throughout that time. And so I really have to give them credit for what they were able to really pull together. It's very moving. In regards to your question for grief, I think grief can be a beautiful starting point for a creative process as long as we don't get stuck there. Grief is this powerful thing that we get to choose what we're going to do with it. Are we going to have it be something that we hold and, dare I say, steward, or is it going to be something that we decide to house and never address? I happen to choose to address it in this, and part of the healing and part of even the releasing of the grief to move past was for me to be able to create, but also to share the story of my sister through my business. And I chose to do that by some mentorship guidance, because I wasn't going to integrate the two. But some of the guidance that I received was, this brand that you're pushing forward isn't just a brand. It's truly you through this medium. And so if you're going to tell your story through this medium, you've got to be able to include the really beautiful things and the really hard things. And at that point in time, one of the really hard things was this journey with my sister. And so it was not an easy thing to integrate at all, because it's very vulnerable, honestly. Like to have this be on a film, to bring it up again is something I have to readdress every time. And what I'm grateful for is because of the healing process that I've gone on with this grief, it is becoming more healing, but that's not to say it doesn't also come with some sadness and some tough emotions. And it brings some things to the surface that can be a little ugly at times. But I feel grateful for the ability to have taken that part of my journey and integrated it into the creative work I was doing at the time, because I'm hoping it's helpful for other people, but I know for sure it was helpful for me, to be able to honor her through it.
Definitely, definitely. You said it beautifully again. Wow. Okay, so throughout the documentary, I could see amazing scenes of an artist at work. And I gotta give credit to Jason and Blue for capturing you holding the leather and working and
Mm.
using the tools and the sewing and all the beautiful stuff. And I heard you say that bags are a puzzle to you. So are they still a puzzle? And why were they a puzzle? Like, why did they puzzle you?
They puzzle. I wish I knew why specifically bags. I think that's even expanded into clothing. I'm fascinated by the way that things, what we call it in the fashion industry, is called draping, the way that something holds its form.
Yes.
That is something that I'm astonished by the weight and the movement of fabrics and in this case leather. Like I'm amazed at the way that it captures light and how necessary light is for you to see how something drapes and how light shapes how something drapes, how you view it, how you see it. And so when I look at bags, I don't know what it is about a bag specifically that becomes a puzzle, but I am intrigued by their construction and specifically with leather because it's not a forgiving material. It can take on so many weights and so many shapes, and the ability to shape it is very much like sculpturing. It's not all this, it's not consistent all the way through. It's a natural fiber, it's a natural material. And so there's a lot of variation and a lot of change. And so to be able to create consistency on texture and consistency on draping with something that isn't consistent is fascinating to me. And then the way that you can put something together so that it can be carried constantly and to carry objects. So it's carrying weight. So this thing has to be substantial, but also in culture, it's not just about what its function. It's also a matter of how does this thing look and what does it go with and why does it go with those things? And so I'll use that same word again, that integration of all of those ideas became a puzzle to me of how can we take different textures and different colors, but also stripping it down so that it's not saying too much at one time. And what does an accessory say about a woman? People talk constantly about an accessory really making the look or making the outfit. So if it's making the look, that means it's saying something very loud. So what is it that this object is saying, and how am I affecting what's being said when a person is wearing it? Totally fascinates me.
Totally. So, did you find it easy to like be yourself in front of, like the camera? Like usually when I
Mm.
talk to documentarians, I'm always fascinated because their subjects are real people. We're not like actors, we're not trained. So how do they familiarize the process? How did you find the process? Were you like just clicked in, or did it take you time to open up and feel like you're familiar yourself? Because there were many, many moments where it felt genuine and authentic, and you were as if the camera didn't exist.
Sure. I would say that during the times of me creating, when I create, I go into a zone. I don't know what it's like for you with poetry, but when
Magic.
I sit down, when I sit down to create, like when I'm actually in the process, whether it's getting the schematics or drawing it up or making it, I go into a zone where the world around me is silent. It is me and the object that I am working on. And so that those parts of the filming were probably the easiest for me because it literally felt as if they're not there. I think I also have to give them credit because they were very conscious of, and I don't know if we ever talked about it. Maybe they would remember. They were very conscious of when I was in the middle of making something, it's almost like they honored that creative space. And maybe because they themselves are creatives as directors, they understand that when an artist is in that zone, when you're in that place, it's a very special place that you don't want to, it can be kind of like a stream, almost like a stream of consciousness, a flow of process that it can be interrupted. And so they were very honoring of that. The parts that they helped me work through were the times that they would sit down and they'd actually record me, they'd ask me questions because I default as an introvert, and it's not my bent to be in front of a camera or to have a microphone or any of that. But I have to credit them. They became a very safe space. And I use that very specifically because this started as being a 1 minute promo video. And then they were like, we think we have something more. We want to make it a 20-minute miniature series. And then like, we think we want it to be more, we're going to make it a full-length documentary. And so it's almost like the process of what it started as invited me into getting to know them as filmmakers and learning to trust them. And we built a very trusting relationship because whenever they would sit down with questions for me, they never forced the timing. They allowed me to have the space I needed to because some of the questions were really difficult and some of them still are. And they honored the space that I needed. And they never expected me to have to answer a question. They were very honoring. And I think when people hold space for you in that way and become safe, it makes it easier and easier to let your guard down and to even allow more emotion and more vulnerability to come up. So the first part of it, I'd say, was easy because it was me getting in that creative zone. The second part of it, I would really have to give credit to Jason and Blue for being such a safe space and really carrying this story so kindly.
Okay, so for me, and I'm talking from my point of view, seeing a poem after it has been written, sometimes it gives me all kinds of emotions like, wow, is this me? I can feel a part of me that is gone and I'm not going to take it back. Or sometimes I just feel proud. Sometimes I feel like, wow, this was very vicious and very vile. How did you even come up with that? How does Shelley see herself on a bag? Like when you finish a bag or when you have like
Mm.
your creation or whatever it is, and you look at it, what do you see of yourself?
It's almost like an expansion of me, especially when it's a new project where, I'm sure you've had this with certain poems where you have an idea of the emotion you're trying to convey, and then you read it back, you're like, that is not it. That's not, that's not what I was trying to say.
At all.
Nobody needs to read this. We're just going to sit this
Goodbye.
back here in this notebook or throw it away. And then you have other moments where you're like, oh, that really stretched me. I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think I could articulate that. I didn't think I could bring that up. And you pause and you look at it and you're like, there's a breadth in me that I didn't realize there was. And then there's moments where you're like, I did that. I just did
Yeah,
that right there. I don't know who I am. I don't know what came out of me, but something like that is in me. Okay. And then you're kind of
girl.
impressed with yourself. So there's quite the range of, oh, let's hide this away versus, oh, there's more to me than I thought versus I'm that girl. I can do that. So it depends on the day. It depends on the project, from what you see of yourself.
Okay, so when people watch your documentary, what do you like? What do you not envision, but what do you hope they would get out of it?
Mm,
Especially, I think young women going through a lot of things because I feel like there is a lot to take from it. First of all, the idea that we have to be open with our emotions or at least allow ourselves vulnerability. And we have to heal and we have to let ourselves be out there, but also young female entrepreneurs, because I feel your story is very important for someone who
mm,
wants to start a small business, for example, to just see your process and see the ups and downs and the highs and the lows. So, what do
mm.
you wish people would take out of it?
Wow. I maybe what I took out of it, part of what I took out of it was it was very affirming for me to see and appreciate and celebrate and honor process versus arrival. I think even the way that Jason and Blue told the story is that oftentimes when we're watching some type of media, we can predict the end. I see where this is going. Here's this small whatever, growing, 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 big explosion. Okay, great. I can celebrate and follow along. When we're forced to sit in the tension of something not being the storyline we thought, what do we do with that space? So I'm hoping people can walk away with a new ability to hold the tension of the unknown and to appreciate and celebrate process, and that maybe a narrative of what they had in their head of what something needs to look like can be reworked, and a new openness of like, let me stop and celebrate the beauty of this process instead of where I think it needs to end or where I think it was going to end or where I think it should end or where I've been told it should end. Because this film, I was curious how they were going to end it. But they ended it with so much sincerity to the real story storyline. And I think it's an important one, especially for an artist, because we have so many narratives and we have dreams, which we should, and it should be beyond imagination. But also knowing like the journey of any type of entrepreneur or designer is like it's not linear. It's like this. And so what do you do with those moments that don't turn out the way you thought they would? Do you have the ability to sit in the tension of it? And do you also have the ability to look at it and to honor it for what it is and to realize that it's part of the fullness of the journey and it's not about just one single arrival point. So I hope it expands people for themselves to be able to look at a process within their own life and celebrate it.
And what is next for you? Like, what are you going to do next now? What is your next journey going to be?
I wish I knew. I'm currently in the visual merchandising realm for a luxury brand. But I'm also starting to work with a brand on some creative consultancy as well as some brand direction, just taking the past that I have and the experiences that I have and really focusing them in to be able to be a helpful resource to another up and coming brand. And I'm also a mother. I'm a very proud mother of a 2.5-year-old, and I'm a very happy wife. And so I am grateful for the life that I have right now. And in regards to things that are next, I stay open and I stay one step at a time. But I'm certainly in the visual realm, and I've said it before, and I'm going to keep saying it. I have seen the state of the handbag industry, and I am not okay with it. And so when the timing is right, I will re-enter, but the timing is not quite right.
And Keith loves movies. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Silas Hite, multi-instrumentalist, music composer of Dawn Dusk, a new documentary directed by Blue and Jason Gerber. So, Silas, I'm just so happy to talk to you today.
Hi, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
How did, Jason and Blue approach you for this project?
They just emailed me out of the blue and they said that they had loved the score from Chef's Table, which is a TV show on Netflix that I worked on over the years, and they felt like that sort of approach of sort of classical music, but sort of stripped down, a minimal, sort of smaller ensemble sound could work for their film, and I totally agreed. One of the sounds that I'm sort of known for is that classical sound, but also the way I record it it's very close. You can really hear the instruments and you can hear the players doing what they're doing and hear all the detail, and it brings a lot of humanity to the recording. And I think that helps with emotional stories like Dawn Dusk. It really helps convey the emotion.
Okay, so how did you come up with this approach or this unique style as a composer? When did it first blossom?
I think part of it came from working at my uncle's studio. His name is Mark Mothersbaugh, and he's a composer. And he did a lot of work with Wes Anderson in the first few Wes Anderson movies. And there's some similarities there in that he used like small ensembles where it would be maybe 4, 5, 6 instruments. But his were a little bit more quirky and goofy and kind of lighthearted, but really classically based approach still with the music. And I thought that that was interesting. So that was sort of an influence of, oh, you can get a really great, cool sound with a limited number of people if you really, if you write cool and interesting parts, and then, it's well recorded and well played. And then as I started recording people on my own, I noticed that, if I used really good microphones and equipment and really good players and really captured the close sound of their fingers on the strings and their breathing and the click clack of the clarinet or whatever woodwind, the sounds that they make, that it brought this sort of intimacy to the recording. And so it was just kind of a combination of influences as I was learning how to be a composer at his studio, and then doing my own recording over time and mixing and finding what appealed to me and what worked really well with picture, with the films that I was working on.
So I heard that you started by creating a mock instruments to create the music for this film because it was during the pandemic. So how did the process go? How did the flow go? Was it difficult? Did you just do whatever you can to get the music out? How did it turn from, actual mock instruments to actual instrumentalists with your unique, approach?
Well, actually, it's not. It didn't really have anything to do with the pandemic. Using those like samples of instruments first. That's pretty typical for almost all composers. Like even if you're writing for a large orchestra, first you're going to, or a small orchestra, like I'm doing. You write the parts with your keyboard, and you use violin samples and cello samples, and you sort of get everything in there, and then you play it for the directors, and you say, is this what you're thinking? How does this work? And then you can make changes very easily and quickly, as opposed to having to bring in players every single time. So it's pretty typical process to do that. And once the directors or whoever's in charge has signed off on the music and said, yes, we like this, it fits, we're not making any more changes, then you bring in the people, the real players, and re-record it, and give them the sheet music. And at that point, it jumps from being pretty good sounding score to a beautiful, beautiful moving score.
So you have Dawn Dusk in your hands, and it's a very interesting project because it's a very heavy topic, but it's also told through an artistic experience. How did you, as a music composer, approach it now that you have the film and you are going to compose the music for it?
Well, I watched it and discussed it quite a bit with Jason and Blue, and yes, it is heavy subject matter and very emotional. And I'm really glad that this film came my way at this point in my career. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and it's difficult to handle these sort of things delicately and correctly, and not too heavy-handedly as a composer, because it's easy to, if what you're seeing on screen is sad, for example, it's easy to play sad strings, but a lot of times then the viewer just feels too sad or too depressed, or that's too heavy, or things like that. And so you have to find just the right balance with the melodies, with the instruments, with the note choices, and even just changing one or two notes can make a huge difference. And fortunately, I feel like I'm pretty attuned to that at this point in my career. And Jason and Blue were very helpful as well. I would send them the music. Well, they would come over to my studio, and I'd play them what I had written, and we'd talk about it, and we'd say, let's try and move this note or that note, or it's just a little bit too heavy. What can we do? And then we make small changes until it just has the right tone. It's just hitting the right way, and you're getting the feels that you want to get from it.
Okay, as a poet, I view the world, of course, I'm hypersensitive and I'm passionate and I interact with the world differently, but I view the world in words. As a music composer, as a musician, how do you react to the world? Do you see it in sounds, in voices, in just music pieces that come to your head all the time? I'm always interested in the artistic process.
Um, I definitely am conscious of sound all the time, for better or worse, wherever I am. Most of the time, there's a lot of annoying sounds out there in the world. Too many people, too many cars, that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I think a lot in terms of sound and composition. I live in the woods, and nature is a huge inspiration. It's visually, it offers up so much visual information and composition and how things are working together. There's a lot of parallels between visuals and music and how things work together and fit together. I think art and music are intertwined, which seems fairly obvious, but there's certain things that are hard to put in words. You just see them and feel them, and then interpret them in your own way.
That's so true. So, starting as a multi-instrumentalist, then you moved to writing music for film and TV. How did the transition happen and why? What did made you feel like you want to compose music for film and TV?
I think in college, I knew that I wanted to do music. I was studying music, and I was studying art, and I was studying business, all three. And I knew I wanted to be a musician in some way, or have some sort of career in music. And I knew that the art was supporting that. I knew I'd need some business skills to support that. But I didn't know what exactly I was going to do in the music world. I liked recording, I liked playing music, I liked um, writing music. I liked, all these different avenues. But basically, as I went through college, certain things sort of appealed to me more than other things. For example, I learned I didn't enjoy playing other people's music. Like, you have to learn a lot of other people's music when you're in
Mm.
college to learn techniques and things, which is valuable, and I'm glad that I did. But I would get really bored and start improvising and be like, oh, what if it did this instead? What if it changed to that? And I realized that the creativity part, the creating part, is what really interested me. And I've been in bands for, as long as I could since I was, a teenager, and I always liked them and I liked the experience, but I would get so bored playing the same songs over and over and over again. I'd have trouble paying attention, even though I was enjoying being there and I like making music and I like the communal aspect of it. It gets really boring for me to play the same thing over and over. So composing is perfect because I'm able to create and create and create, and create new stuff all the time. The drawback is often when I write something, if someone asks me to play it for them, a week later, I won't remember how it goes because I already wrote, 10 things since then or whatever. So I often, people are like, can't you play that song you wrote? And I'm like, maybe if I listen to it for a while, but the constant creating is what it's about for me.
So it's just the rush of creation after creation. Oh wow, I totally get this. I never memorize a poem. I can't. So it's just I totally understand that the creative process also is very dynamic and differs from one artist to the other. So this is the beauty of it because whenever you talk to an artist, everyone is different from the other. So how did Dawn Dusk differ from earlier projects? Like when you have that film and you were there writing for it, how did it feel different? Which aspect? Of course, there is the obvious of, as I said, it's about the artist and the grief and that, but was there something else that you felt, which is why the music was just so unique?
Yeah, I think it was the emotional content was so strong, but also that it's a documentary and it's about real people and real people that the directors knew and had spent a lot of time with. It's their friend, I would imagine, at that point after having spent so much time with her. Um, I've scored many things, and sometimes, let's say you're writing music for a horror film or something, and you're watching people be murdered on screen. You don't have any emotional reaction like, oh, that's horrible. You're just thinking, how do we make it, funny, or how do we make it more scary or whatever. But with this, it was such a human story, and it needed to be treated with respect. And I was really tried to be very conscious when I would speak to Jason and Blue about it, that we treated the story and her experience with the utmost respect that we could when writing for it, when trying to tell it, and not try and, you don't want to shape things with the music in a way that's untrue or sensationalize it or anything like that. It was really about being as true and emotionally supportive to what was already there, um, because it was such a strong story and an amazing story anyway. It was really just about really supporting and portraying that in the best way possible. And so I don't think I've scored anything with that much emotional content that was really, a real true life story before. So I think that's how it was so different.
I mean, of course, this project is different from your Netflix show, which is an entirely different monster, cooking and chefs and stuff like that. It must be an entirely different, like process or just even a thought process for you as a composer, which brings me to the idea of do you enjoy more the emotional ones or the ones where you just emotionally detached and you can just fit in the music?
That's interesting. Um, I do like I do like a story where there's a lot of emotion because then you're trying to do more with the music, which is more interesting. Sometimes, particularly with television, a lot of times it's more about just the energy and keeping the energy going and things like that, which is fine, but not really as interesting. Or it's a simpler problem to solve as a composer. But when you're trying to hit complex emotions that are changing, throughout the course of a scene or whatever, that's sort of more of a fun challenge. I will say there's some similarities between like Chef's Table and this story in that Chef's Table, even though it's about cooking, but it's more about the individual chefs
The
and the
chef.
journey that they go on, which is also, I think, why Jason and Blue were drawn to me as a composer because they've seen me tell those stories through Chef's Table. But I think that one of the differences would be with Chef's Table, like there would be scenes at the end where it's called like the cooking symphony, where it's a montage and they're making their signature dishes and it's all, it's very exciting and things like that. And when I first started, one of the challenges was, they were like, it has to be very exciting. And in my head, I'm thinking, but you're looking at a pile of noodles or like a bowl of rice or so. I don't, it's just not that exciting.
At all. Yeah.
Sure, it tastes great, but like the excitement isn't there. Nothing's moving. It's not. But then when you build the excitement is not about the individual dish. It's about the moment in the show. And when you arrive there and when you get to that and you watch it all in sequence, then you sort of understand. But that's definitely a challenge, is when you have to imbue something with what you feel isn't there necessarily. Now that show, it does work and it is exciting, but there are times on, let's say, movies that maybe have like a low budget, that are like new, like young, maybe not even young, but inexperienced filmmakers, and they may come to you and say, oh, the dialogue's not as good as we thought, or the editing doesn't quite work here, the scene isn't very, it's not doing what we want, we're hoping the music can kind of glue it together. And it can help sometimes, but that's no fun to just be the band-aid. Or it's just a lot to ask of the music, because if the scene's not good,
I'm not going to save your movie. Exactly. I totally agree. Like, they put the load on you. I can totally see that. Yes, yes, that's a lot. So, was there like a difficult moment here? Like, was there a very enjoyable moment to compose music for, and another which felt that you had to go back and forth, or just felt, wow, it's weighing down on me? Which was the most enjoyable and the most difficult to?
So it might have been the same scene.
Wow.
There's a scene where Chelli is in a leather store called Horoween, and she's exploring all of these different types of leather. And the owner
Amazing
of the
scene.
store, I believe it's the owner, is walking her through and showing her all these amazing textures and different leathers she can work with, and colors and thicknesses and things like that. And Shelley's really like, wow, this is it, really responding to it, and felt like that was like what she was meant to work with. And it's like a big moment for an artist. And I can definitely identify with coming across something like that, whether it's an instrument or an artistic something that I want to work with, and being like incredibly inspired by it. And Jason and Blue were trying to explain that to me. Okay, it needs to be this exciting piece or exciting scene in the film, and it's a few minutes long. It's kind of long scene,
Hmm.
but also, there's all these other things to balance, and they didn't want it to just be super energetic and like, crazy energy over the top or anything, because that didn't quite work. And so I scored it a few times, and it didn't quite work, and we kept going back and forth with it. And it's always a little bit frustrating, not frustrating, but it feels like, it's an unresolved problem in my head, like a math problem or something that needs completed, or a puzzle that needs completed, and it's not quite there. And so it's always a little bit like this itch that needs scratched until it's done, and then it works well, and everyone's happy, and then it feels like, yes, that's it. And in this case, what finally ended up working was, we wanted this sort of dreamy effect. Oh, that was the issue. They wanted it still to be very dreamy, but like this beautiful, exciting moment of dreaminess that happens. And so dreamy music isn't typically very upbeat, or, there's not much motion happening there, or very much, excitement to keep it going. It's kind of slow often. And we didn't want that. So we wanted it to keep moving, but still be sort of floaty or dreamy. And I started doing some research, and I was reading about how Chopin's music is sort of dreamy, and how he accomplishes that, and or accomplished that. And it was interesting to me to read about, like, oh, okay, in the piano he was using very low notes and then very high notes kind of fluttering about, and just read about some techniques like that and apply them in my own way, which is of course nothing like he would do. But that seemed to crack the code, and when I played it for them, it really worked. And so that piece is called Friends with Leather, and it's the third single that's coming out in December from the album.
Perfect. I love the score, honestly. I can't wait for the singles
Thank
just to
you.
drop. So, what is next for you now?
Well, today, Google released a Halloween doodle that I did. So if you go to Google something, you'll see that the logo on Google is like a little cat Halloween scene, and you push play, and there's like little movies, and it's a 5-level video game, and I did the music and sound effects for that, and that'll be up today and tomorrow for Halloween. And then on their website. You can play it later. I'm working on a TV show for CNN. It's a travel show, and it's called My Happy Place, and that will be out next year. And so that's been keeping me pretty busy, and working on some commercials and working on some albums and things like that, and putting my new studio together. This is the first time it's been filmed, actually.
Awesome.
So thank you. And I still have to do a lot of sound treatment. It's a little bit too echoey in here, but I just moved in last week. So there's still much work to be done. But as you can see, there's a lot of instruments and stuff set up. And I've been working here all week. It's been lovely.
Wow. An artist truly at work. Wow. Silas, just talking to you made me realize the power of music, the beauty of music, how film scores either elevate a film or put it down, and how Dawn Dusk just did magic with the music and that heightened the emotion. So thank you so much for inspiring us or for creating this lovely music. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Blue and Jason Gerber, directors of Dawn Dusk, a new documentary that touches on themes of grief, domestic violence, but also what it's like to be an artist and the artistic experience in general. Jason and Blue, I'm just so happy to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
We're looking forward to chatting.
I want to ask you, this was supposed to be a short film. How did it become a 92-minute long documentary?
Yeah, well, we, at the time we were looking for something for our reel, for our portfolio, and maker pieces, so to speak, were very popular at the time, and we were really interested in them. And so just so happened that we met Chelli. We were actually invited to an open studio that she was hosting. She was kind of like friend of friends. And so we went to her studio, and that night, we were just so impressed by her work, and her space was just so striking and beautiful that we approached her and we said, what would you think about us filming a short video about you? And we ended up getting coffee with her, and just wanted to get some of her backstory before we entered into filming with her. And we asked her, so how did you start doing what you're doing? And she told us the story of her sister, and our jaws kind of just like dropped to the floor, and and we almost didn't know how to process what she was telling us, but it was just it was very moving and very poignant. And so as we began filming with her, we realized that that story she told us about her sister and just the current processing that she was in with that tragedy was really in every aspect of her business, of her art that she was making, and to some point, in some ways, in ways that she didn't even realize that it was, reflecting in her art. And so as we continued filming, the two of us kind of were talking, and we were realizing this story seems a lot bigger than a short. And so I think about like a month into filming, we approached her and said, so we think this might be a little bit longer. What do you think of that? And, with her consent, like continued on and decided to just leave room for the story to unfold in whatever length it needed to be. And it ended up like we did film a lot, and it was, in the edit, we did have to figure out what exactly is the story. What is the heart of the story? Because there were so many things that we weren't able to fit into the film. And we really wanted it to be, digestible, and just a good length of feature film to watch enjoyably. So with our editor and co-producer, Meredith, we worked together to do that. Yeah.
I think it's just an unexpected answer from the start when she told us about her sister. And we just, I think, are always attuned to the stories that we're working on, whether it's in commercial, whether it's a short film, whether it's another narrative project, or whatever project we're working on. We're always trying to be in tune with the story and like listen to what the story is telling us, and then make creative decisions based on that. And uh, the story was saying there's more than just a bag maker here. There's depth. There's pain and healing. There's a rich journey that you're in the middle of with Chelli, and we listened to that, and we decided to make what we made, and here we have Dawn Dusk, which is now 92 minutes, and I think really, I think it works, and I think we did find the heart of the story.
What I love about this documentary, it's about heavy subject matter, but
Yeah.
you're not making it exploitative. You are treating it with such class, with such sensibility, and you're making it about grief, about heavy topics like domestic violence and stuff like that. But you are honoring the subject, honoring even the subject that the subject is talking about, the person, making this person a human being and not just a news headline or just, like a topic in the documentary. How did you both manage to do that? Because this really impressed me.
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I think really we just wanted to be true to Chelli's story. And that is what Chelli was going through is, she was in a very unique place as an artist who was also kind of, in the growing stages of a business, as an entrepreneur and as an artist, while also in this very unique place in her grief journey, of grieving Megan. And, we weren't coming in right as the trial was happening. We weren't coming in right in the beginning. We were coming in this place where she was really having to figure out how do I be a person? How do I be an artist? How do I, pursue this dream that I have, while also grieving this severe loss? And how do I honor my sister in that? And so really we just followed her in those questions. And maybe I think our role really was like observing that those were the questions that she was asking and forming them into words for her. I don't know if she was at the time able to form them into those words. And
we saw the questions being asked, and then that she was asking herself, but then we would ask her those in an interview, and she would go, "Oh, that's actually something I've been thinking about. I didn't realize it," and then we would talk about it. And I think too, our value is that my value, your value is not to sensationalize. It is not to like a true crime story is not what we wanted to do. Because so often what happens is in true crime and in these stories where there is a horrible loss like this, it's, justice is served, and Chelli talks about this in the movie, justice is served, right? We all feel better, right? But no, we don't all feel better. And we don't often get glimpses into who remains. We don't often get glimpses into the stories that continue after. We don't get glimpses into how do you heal, how do you process your grief journey. And I think that is something that I think audiences and myself are clamoring for, are looking for. They're looking for these continuations of the story. They're looking to see how they can relate and how they can understand their own grief through the eyes of people like Chelli in these kinds of stories, rather than just talking about some of these sensational topics that the movie touches on but is not really about. And I think that we kind of knew that from the start because it's sort of built into our values as storytellers. And I think that we were able to bring that into the process.
And really, it was also just where she was at. Like I think one of the things that we kind of observed even maybe before she did was how sunrises and sunsets had been a really faithful part of her healing process. And, she just was sharing about how she was really inspired by sunrises and sunsets. And then we kind of dug deeper of like, but why are you? And that was really when we realized, this is what the movie is about, is it's about, that this grief journey is reflected in her art, in her collection. And then just what happens like as she moves through that collection, and as she like kind of moves through, the rest of her journey, both as a businesswoman, as an artist, and as the sister of this woman who was lost very traumatically. Yeah.
Definitely. So for me, I'm always surprised as documentarians, you don't have trained actors, you have a normal human being, but you get them to be so loose and comfortable in front of the camera. How do you create the safe space for just regular people like us who are not trained in front of the camera to just be themselves and be loose? Because I love this. I could see Chelli existing, not she's being shot. I could feel her just existing through your lens. How did you manage to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, well, one, in this particular case, for this kind of documentary, consent is really important. So communicating upfront what we're doing, how we're doing it throughout the process. That doesn't mean that we're giving Chelli creative input or we're showing her what we're doing like creatively, but just informing her that we're talking about when we're going to come, like what we're going to capture, what our goals are. Are we talking about heavy subjects today, or are we just talking about making bags and creating art? Letting her know so she wasn't caught off guard necessarily. Later in the process, there might have been times where we did ask a surprising question, or we asked something a surprising way, but we had a foundation at that point. So early on, especially, consent's really important. And then just time, I think, and like proving sort of your trustworthiness, that you're not interrupting the space, you're not interrupting the flow with customers and with clients, and just the workflow of the day, and just being there and being part of. It's almost like we were office mates in a way. That's how she described it at one point, that we were just in her studio a lot, and it was, she would work and we'd say, hey, we're coming at 10. She said, great. And we kind of roll in and set up, and she would say, hey, and we would just set up everything. And it was really informal and casual after a while. At the beginning, I think that, it was a little bit more formal, and it was a little bit more stiff. And I think that there were more nerves, but I think that the time spent, and the continuation of proving yourself like trustworthy storytellers over time, is what allows you to kind of forget that the camera is there, and to be open. And then also just, I think, I don't know if Chelli enjoyed the process all the time. I think sometimes she did, and other times it was probably very strange. But I know that she talked about, she often likes to joke that it was a couple years of therapy with us. And I think that as much as we tried to be observers, I think that, documentarians do influence and have an effect in the space they're in, because you can't not. And I think that in some ways, some of the things that Chelli journeyed through and was able to verbalize, I think she would have gotten there on her own, but I think that we just happened to be part of that process, and so that became something that she became accustomed to. And I think that it was sort of that combination of things that made her comfortable.
I mean, who knows if she would have gotten, maybe she would have gone to the same place, but I think at the time, we were maybe the only ones asking the questions that we were. But yeah, just to go off of what you said, I do think we tried to strike a healthy balance between, creating a safe space for her, but also leaving some things, as a surprise to capture those natural like reactions to. We obviously weren't sending her lists of questions beforehand. But we were letting her know, today we're going to talk about this topic.
Generally, we're going to talk, but then we do these long 3-hour long interviews. And I think that at the end of a 2.5-hour long interview, you're just talking, and you kind of get comfortable.
We also, I think one thing that we did well, that was the right choice, was we eased into the hard topic.
Yeah.
So we began with really basic, like, tell us about your journey to getting here. Tell us about your art. Tell us that, like, kind of these broader, like, easy topics to talk about. And then, we moved into things like talk about your values of like quality and craftsmanship versus artistry and things like that. And then, you know, and then we got to, you know, today we want to, we let her know beforehand, we want to dive into what happened with Megan, and we would love for you to tell us, you know, the story. And so, and you know, I think she really wanted, that was the other thing. She really wanted to tell the story. She really wanted to answer all of our questions. She really wanted to talk about the things that we did because she knew that they were powerful and that she knew that it was important.
Yeah. I think that some of the legacies that she wrestles with, specifically with Megan in her life, are legacies that can have an impact on other people. And that's why, you know, she's volunteering at Wings, and that's why she was doing a lot of the things she was doing as a giving company as well. And those are things that we saw from the start, and we tried to unpeel the layers back slowly. And I think we did that without really an agenda, without a prerogative. And I think that also makes the subject feel safe.
Yeah,
definitely. So there is a scene that I think everyone who's seen the film loved. Even Silas, the composer, is just talking to him. The leather, the way Chelli interacts with the leather, the way she just goes and you see the racks of leather and how she's in love with it. So I would imagine, was this an enjoyable scene to shoot? Because I want to know your most difficult scene to shoot and the most enjoyable, where you felt like you really liked it while you were shooting it.
Our most enjoyable scene and our most difficult scene.
I think it's a really good question.
Well, I think I can start with maybe the most difficult scene. To be honest.
Yeah, that one we know.
Yeah. Well, are we on the same page about it? About in Florence?
Florence,
Yeah.
okay.
So Chelli is in Florence, taking you know, an advanced leather bag making class with these leather masters. And we didn't spend, she's there for 3 months. We didn't spend all 3 months with her. So we ended up scheduling our time out so that we could go and spend some time with her near the end of her time, so we could kind of reflect back on the time that was spent there, rather than trying to just document the whole process. And so I think that Chelli had been in this very, you know, very isolated from her actual life in Florence, just making bags by herself with her classmates, without really the weight of her business and her life in the United States
or
Americans at all
around.
And so when we showed up, I think we were a little bit of culture shock for her. It was sort of like, whoa, my old life is here. And it was actually one of the few moments that we felt challenged in finding a way for Chelli to open up to us again, because it had been a while since we filmed.
Or we felt like uneasy. We felt, you know, we weren't sure how open she was.
We had to tread lightly is how we felt. And so the kind of climactic sunrise when we're after she goes on a run and we go up to the top of the hill and we're looking at this moment, and it's that moment means a lot in the context of the movie.
And also, just to add to that, you know, to add on top of the difficulty, we have one morning to get this sunrise.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, in our schedule, like there's no other morning. It's like it could be a dead, it could not. And I remember saying a prayer. I was like, please, God, like show off. Please make it a good sunrise.
And she said it had been cloudy a lot. And so she hadn't been able to go see a lot of these good sunrises. And so we're there and we're feeling like we have to tread lightly, and we're not sure what the weather's going to be like or if the sunrise is going to be beautiful. And when it happens, when the sun peaks over that hill and it starts to become one of the most transcendent, memorable sunrises that we've ever had, like I've ever seen, that Chelli's ever seen, and it's like all the walls melted away, and suddenly the connection that we had as filmmaker and subject opened back up. And
she was also getting a kick out of the fact that we had to climb a very, very long,
tall hill
staircase
with all our gear.
And she's, you know, running up, turns around, filming us, huffing it up. And she's but
so it was both like one of the most it was difficult in the sense that we there was just so many unknowns, and we really weren't sure where what we were going to get, and it was a little unnerving, and we were trying to figure out, what's the story here? What do we have here? As you always are doing. But when you have limited time and you can't go back to get something, that's a hard moment. So I think it turned out to be like a very amazing scene, but I think in the moment it felt really challenging. So I think that's probably the hardest scene. Maybe enjoyable scene.
I mean, it ended up being great. Yeah. I don't know. I think most enjoyable, I'd say I think filming the in Horween, the leather store, I think that was really enjoyable. I remember the prompt that we actually gave Silas for scoring that scene was kid in a candy shop, because that's kind of, how Chelli was acting, how she was in there.
That kind of enthusiasm is really contagious. You get energy when someone else is excited about something, you get excited with them.
Yeah. But I also remember having a lot of fun filming her in creating bags in Florence, because for the first it's kind of a funny way to, not that I was happy that she was struggling, but for the first time she was actually like having difficulty, because they were new things that she was practicing and
new, very advanced techniques.
Yeah. And I think for the first time we really saw her getting frustrated as she was trying out these things. And, not that we were making fun of her, but rather we were laughing alongside of her, as she was kind of laughing at herself during that. And, it just really, I think it was just a very relatable moment to, see like, oh, like we're all still learning at our crafts, we're all like trying to be better and to, create like more amazing things. And so we just got to like relate to her in that.
Definitely. I related. It's a very beautiful process, the one that you described, and how it translated on screen. So I think my final question is, what do you want viewers really to take from the film? Do you just want them to be moved? Do you want them to take action? Do you want them to just be in tune with themselves? I want to know, like, as creators, usually there's something that you want others to take from your art. So what do you want them to take from your art?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So I think on a surface level, we want Chelli's story to touch people however they need to be touched, whether that's being encouraged as an artist, as a business owner,
someone on a distinct grief journey,
someone who's maybe struggling to forgive, that all of those things, I think, are things that we're hoping that the audience takes away from it. I think that Chelli sits in a very unique place as someone who has gone through something so dark, and yet chosen to walk into the light, walk on the other, getting to the other side of it. And just hearing her encouragement to be free from that prison of unforgiveness, I think, is one of the most powerful things I've ever heard someone like say to an audience, like being that scene at the Wings Gala where she's giving that speech. It was just completely awe-inspiring to stand in that room and to be there as she was saying this speech to an audience of people who, of all the people in the world, those were the ones who have a legitimate, reason to hold a grudge or to hate someone and to struggle to walk out of that prison of unforgiveness. So it was very powerful, and I hope that that message can go out to others.
I agree.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Jason and Blue, so much. It was amazing talking to you. Can't wait for everyone to watch the film. Dawn Dusk is a very inspiring but also very creative journey into the self and into the outside world. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for having
you.
us.
Thank you.